On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
The woman who would be king. Kamala Harris is running to be the next president of the United States, replacing Joe Biden. And last night in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, she was crowned as the formal candidate for the Democratic Party in the November election. And if some of the, especially the Democratic-friendly media, is any expectation or any marker, she had overwhelming positive reactions. I watched a particular segment on MSNBC where they were just gushing about how great she was, how perfect the speech was, how she electrified the crowd, which is something that's been happening of late. And of course, they're all excited about where this is going and how this is going to catapult her into the lead. In fact, also, I think on NBC News, they show that since Kamala Harris has been designated the nominee for the last 3 weeks, she has gained 5 points in the polling. She went from being behind by 3 to now ahead by 2. Now then, the more battleground states are at play that were not at play before Biden. So many things are starting to line up that gives Harris a legitimate shot. In fact, you might even say she's the front runner at this point, and certainly the trends are moving in her direction. What was not as noticed yesterday by very many people was earlier in the day on the Washington Post, there was a piece in there called The Reinvention of Kamala Harris. And that got my attention because my wife and I had actually been commenting on this of late, even a month or so ago before all this happened, that there was a significant public difference between Kamala Harris of the first year or first 2 years of the administration and things of late. And, you know, I'm not going to include any of them on here, but you don't have to go far to Google them. There's all kinds of things about the cackling laugh and some of the word salad and all this kind of stuff. So the things that she did a lot in the first 2 years, now all of a sudden she's not doing anymore. And the results are, from her perspective, are very good because she actually carries herself in a statesmanlike way. She's talking in ways that sound presidential. She's dressing the part. She has power dresses, not dresses, but power outfits, that project stability and confidence, etc. All the things that go into making this exciting for the Democratic Party. And that's actually one of the big issues as to why the Democratic Party is so excited, because the contrast between Biden, especially in the June debate with Trump, to where he was listless, couldn't hardly finish sentences, got lost, etc., all that. And then in comparison to the energetic, young, powerful-looking Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party just went crazy. And of course, one of the keys to winning any election is that you get your base excited. And they hadn't been excited before that. And so now then that just, excitement breeds excitement. A crowd breeds a crowd, et cetera. So things are really going well for Kamala Harris. Now, before we get too excited about that, especially if you're not just a dyed-in-the-wool Democratic person who's going to vote for them no matter what, if you want to be careful about who you elect president of the United States, there's some things we need to pay attention to. And that's why I want to go back, first of all, before we get into what she actually said last night in relations to national security, is I want to go back to that Washington Post article there, because there are some really important things in it. Now, the way it was written, I think the intention was to, if not a puff piece, to be a very positive piece for the vice president. To say, hey, she's undergone this transformation, and here's how some of it happened. They interviewed a lot of key people who were in the know in the administration, and all of it's characterized in ways that are positive. But if you look at it without the lens of pro-Democratic Party, there are some real big red flags that come up. And listen, we need to understand here, this is not just a popularity contest per se. Obviously, every election ultimately comes down to that, because the more popular somebody is, obviously, the more they're going to get elected. But we're not talking about winning a popularity contest. We're talking about becoming the next commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces with the nuclear codes in her or his hands, and the decision-making power over when we do or don't go to war, when we do or don't send people potentially to their deaths to defend our country, or to take action in support of policies. It is a profoundly important position. And we need to make sure that we put the person in there that has the best chance of success. Now, I'm not going to get into the point right now and compare Kamala Harris to Trump or to any of the other candidates that are running. Right now, that I'm not talking about that. We'll probably get into that as we get closer to the election. We're going to look at a number of the other candidates, definitely including Trump. But for right now, I just want to look at the actual qualifications and what you need to understand about where Harris is now versus where she started. So now, one of the first things, Gary, if you can bring up that first point there from the article. One of the authors writes in there that Harris has so far limited her appearances largely to scripted gatherings before friendly crowds and has yet to hold an extended news conference or debate Republican nominee Donald Trump. They have a debate scheduled for September 10th. But the remake is unmistakable and it is no accident. And so now what the article is going to go on to talk about is how this remake happened. And here's what you need to understand before we even get into some of the specifics here. This is a marketing remake. The person that Kamala Harris was is the same person that Kamala Harris is now. And you can polish some things up, but you can't change the fundamental nature of who someone is. And that is going to be really important. And you're going to see some specific examples of that in this episode here. One of the things that they're trying to change and why they did a remake is because as recently as just last year, Kamala Harris had historically bad ratings, positive ratings for a vice presidential candidate. In fact, according to this poll, an NBC News poll, 49% of registered voters have a negative view of Vice President Harris compared to 30% positive view. NBC News says her net negative is the lowest for a vice president in the history of its poll. So that's June 26th of 2023, just a little over a year ago. That's how far she has risen to that raucous support you saw for her last night. So the question is, what in the world happened to change the image? And that is important. So now then let's look at the next one there, Gary. If you can pull up number 2. One of the things they wrote in there is that it's not really her fault. It was a fault of the administration. So they're trying to take the blame. It's not a problem with the vice president. It's not a problem with what she says or does or policies, et cetera. It's the support staff is what they claim. They said one of the senior advisors said, I did not feel that we served her as well as we could have at the beginning, and not through any malice, not because people didn't want her to succeed. Anita Dunn, a former senior advisor to President Biden, said, there wasn't the level of understanding that she's getting judged differently. She's getting covered differently. Most vice presidents don't get covered the way she did and the same level of scrutiny. So I don't feel like we served her well as it could have been. So, okay, let me just stop right there. Are you trying to tell me that the administration, the Joe Biden administration, and all the senior people that are in there did not realize when they started that the first female vice president in the history of the country, a woman of color, is going to be scrutinized when she gets on the stage, when she endures office? I kind of think they did. So what this is already starting to set up is that they're trying to deflect attention from Harris, what she has said, what her policies were, et cetera, onto something else, i.e. them. We just didn't do a good job supporting her. That's the real problem here. Don't look at what she said. Don't look at how she's behaved. Look at us, because we're going to fix that. And you also saw in 2021 that the Washington Post itself was talking about lots of problems. But here's one of the issues, and I want to raise this quickly. So this is from the Washington Post also in 2021, where they were reporting on just this terrible actions of Kamala Harris's staff and how people were abandoned and left and right. And one of the things they wrote is that critics scattered over 2 decades. And again, I point out, this is not just some kind of magic transformation, but this is evidence of a continued pattern of behavior. 2 decades to point to an inconsistent and at times degrading principal who burns through seasoned staff members who have succeeded in other demanding high-profile positions. People used to putting aside missteps, sacrificing sleep, and enduring occasional tirade from an irate boss say doing so under Harris can be particularly difficult. Gil Duran, a former Democratic strategist aide working to Harris who quit after 5 months working for her in 2013, said Harris is repeating, quote, the same old destructive patterns. Who are the next talented people you're going to bring in and burn through and then have them pretend they're retiring for positive reasons. So you see, this is not something new. So all these things that happened in the first 2 years of the administration that resulted in just last year of Harris having historically bad ratings, worse than the polling that they've ever done when they've been doing those kind of polls for vice presidents. There was a reason for this. It's based on her behavior. It's based on her policies. It's based on the things that she said. People out, you can have one thing about people who are on her staff who only see things that they do, but it's a separate thing when also the public at large, and that includes a majority of Democrats as well, had a negative view of her. There was a real reason for that, and that's a big red flag that we're going to start with there. Now then, let's go on to look at this remake here. So the next thing in the number 4 there, they said about a year into her tenure, so sometime in the summer, I believe it was, of 2022, the White House started making moves. Lorraine Voles, a seasoned operative who'd worked for Al Gore and Hillary Clinton, was hired as Harris's chief of staff after the previous one had been fired or resigned. Staffers created an operation designed to connect Harris with individuals and groups who supported her and would speak up on her behalf. Harris herself, with Biden's support, began focusing on less on perilous political tasks like tackling the cause of immigrations, and seized instead on issues as abortion and racism, which played to her rhetorical strengths. So don't miss that. This is red flag number 2. The administration, because they saw these negatives that were accruing to her and building up and the trouble she was having on her staff, they said, let's give her less difficult things to talk about. Let's give her things that she has rhetorical strength in. Talking about abortion, LGBTQ stuff, and on racism, things that are in her comfort zone. So they started putting her in her comfort zone. They started getting people who would be good to her and that would then support her out in public. So it's an image issue, folks. When you run for campaign like is happening right now, you can understand why people talk about, racism and abortion especially, because it's a lightning rod issue, very emotional. And even though it plays hardly any role in governing, it's always a big issue in campaigns because it gets the electorate fired up, which is the reason why they keep going to that. That's during a campaign. You're talking here right now during the time of the under discussion here when they're supposed to be governing. And you're taking her off of a hard issue like immigration, which they initially put her on. We're going to see some examples of that in just a minute, and put her on stuff that's rhetorically comfortable for her, stuff that it gives the impression and the image that things are going well. When you're the vice president of the United States, a heartbeat away from possibly the White House itself, you damn well better be versed in the substance of governing, and that means the hard issues. If you can't handle the hard issues and you're only comfortable with rhetorical strengths, we have a big problem. That's another big red flag that we've got here. And now then we're going to see that that's going to continue on here, because in the next one here, if you can bring up number 5 here, and some Democrats cite another reason for the vice president's marked relaxed demeanor since her nomination. In 2020, they say she was trying to make a splash and party veering sharply to the left and was visibly uncomfortably doing it. Don't miss that one. So right there, they're telling you that when she's doing something that's hard, she's visibly uncomfortable. Gary, put that back up, please, Al. This year, Harris's centrism on issues like criminal justice fits much better where most Democrats are. And she did not have to fight her way through primaries or debates, letting her bask in the adulation of crowds rather than needing to prove herself. Now, this is the big red flag number 3 here. So in 2020, in the 2020 campaign, starting in 2019, Harris was in the debates and was not doing very well and had some real trouble in some of these. And in the process, because there was quite a number of Democrats that were initially vying for the nomination in 2020. And she ended up dropping out, by the way, before they even got to the first vote. So she didn't last very long under that heat. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what it is and why this is so important now about how things have turned out here. Here's one of the famous, there's several, but here's one of the famous engagements she had with Tulsi Gabbard in November of 2019.
We need someone on that stage who has the ability to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, and someone who has the ability to rebuild the Obama coalition and bring the party and the nation together. I believe I am that candidate.
Thank you, Senator. Congresswoman Gabbard, I'll give you a chance to respond.
What Senator Harris is doing is unfortunately continuing to traffic in lies and smears and innuendos because she cannot challenge.
In November is someone who has the ability to win. And by that, we need someone on that stage who has the ability to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump and someone who has the ability to rebuild the Obama coalition and bring the party and the nation together. I believe I am that candidate.
Thank you, Senator. Congresswoman Gabbard, I'll give you a chance to respond.
What Senator Harris is doing is unfortunately continuing to traffic in lies and smears and innuendos because she cannot challenge the substance of the argument that I'm making, the leadership and the change that I'm seeking to bring in our foreign policy, which only makes me guess that she will, as president, continue the status quo, continue the Bush-Clinton-Trump foreign policy of regime change wars, which is deeply destructive. This is personal to me because I served in Iraq. I left my seat in the state legislature in Hawaii, volunteered to deploy to Iraq, where I served in a medical unit where every single day I saw the terribly high human cost of war. I take very seriously the responsibility that the president has to serve as commander-in-chief, to lead our armed forces, and to make sure always, no, I'm not going to put party interests first. I will put the interests of the American people
Congresswoman. I want to briefly give.
So you see there, you had Harris making this, rhetorical flourish of a strong statement, but then now she's challenged. And now Tulsi Gabbard gets a chance to fire back. And people are left by watching that and going, I wonder which one of those things is right. Now then, here's one of the engagements she had with then candidate Biden, also in 2020 campaign.
Under our plan, we will ensure that everyone has access to health care. Your plan, by contrast, leaves out almost 10 million Americans.
The plan, no matter how you cut it, costs $3 trillion when it is in fact employed. Number one, 10 years from now, after 2 terms of the senator being president, after her time. Secondly, it will require middle-class taxes to go up, not down. Thirdly, it will eliminate employer-based insurance. And fourthly, what happens in the meantime?
Okay, so you see the results of that. She, again, in both of those cases here, and that was the case in virtually all of them, she was a good public speaker. She makes some, good rhetorical flourish, and then she gets eviscerated on the backside, where the other candidates is talking about, here's the reality of what you're talking about there. And what was the result? What happened? She didn't even make it to the first election. The first election during the primary season. So she had fallen so far in the polls because when people see her under pressure, when they see her getting called out on things, they don't like the results. And so they didn't vote for her. They went with all the other people. She was way below everybody. Ended up falling out for that. Now then you have the situation here where you see in the Washington Post, they want to bask in the adulation of crowds. Now imagine if she's just all she had to do in 2020 was make these flourishing statements and no one ever challenged her. She didn't have to go into debates. She didn't have to have somebody else calling her out on any of these things. Probably would have had a good impression. And that kind of leads to the question of how much of this may have been planned here. Now, I'll just say at the outset, I don't have any insider information. I haven't heard from anybody in the Democratic Party. I don't know anything going on. And we're probably not going to really know how all of this stuff transpired with Biden coming out and withdrawing from the race when he did until probably years from now when people write books and all that sort of thing. But the evidence that we have certainly does make one wonder if at least some of the people in the administration wanted Kamala Harris to get the nomination when she did, as late as she did, so that there wouldn't be a primary this time. Now, I'll just tell you, I believed from the beginning, and I'm talking about even before Biden had taken office, that after he had won the election, I thought that he's only going to be a one-term president. I thought that's all he wanted to do. My guess was that after the 2022 midterm elections, he would probably announce, I'm not going to run. I'm going to pass the torch on to a new generation. And then there would be a debate process, and the best candidate would win, and they would go on. That obviously didn't happen. What we don't know is was that actually not the plan all along, or did Biden say, no, actually, I'm going to continue to have it? But as we've talked about, and many people have, this cognitive decline of Biden is obviously well known to the people inside. Now, the senior Democrats certainly were not taken by surprise in June at that debate when he had that terrible performance. It's not like they didn't know before, even though you'd seen all these. I'm sure there's plenty of, you can just Google and you can see a long string of all of these senior Democratic people in House and Senate and other officials talk about how, he's sharp as a tack and all this kind of stuff, knowing for sure that wasn't the case. They did know behind the scenes. The question is, why would they have moved earlier so that many people in the Democratic Party could have participated, so that the Democratic voters could have participated in a primary, so that they get to select who they want? Now, if they wanted Kamala Harris because they thought, well, she'll probably have the best chance, all of our war chest that we've already gotten of money raised for the, Biden-Harris will still be able to work for Harris, but we would have to start from scratch if they had it with somebody else, if it turned out somebody else won. So you have to wonder, was the plan to wait as late as possible for Biden to finally withdraw so that there wouldn't be time to do one, so that Kamala Harris would get to bask in the adulation of adoring crowds, so that they would only get to see the good stuff, the rhetorical flourishes, the things where she's strong, doesn't have to go to issues where she doesn't want to talk. No one has to ask her about these hard issues like you saw on national security, on issues related to the domestic politics that Biden called her out on and some of her other plans. No one ever did that. So she was able to go, and now then you see the results are coming in good for her. But that's a big red flag again, that it's at least plausible that the Democratic Party wanted to protect her from that, protect her from hard questions. And we know that even as of yesterday, she was still not taking any questions at all. It was just statements. It was just speeches, et cetera. So they're continuing on with this trend. And the results are coming in good for them so far. Now, that's good for her. It's not necessarily good for us, because when you're trying to be the president of the United States, you have to tackle the hard questions, not just about an election, but especially things about governing. And I want to go back to that article because they raised one specific issue that highlighted why they needed to go with this. And that was the famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, Lester Holt interview. Early on, Biden tasked Harris and their administration with taking on the root causes of migration from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, an assignment that tied her to one of the most searing issues in American politics, which is appropriate. If you're the vice president, you should be doing things that are hard. That's why they elected you. That's why they brought you on in that position. In an interview with NBC's Lester Holt, Harris appeared frustrated by repeated questions about why she had not yet visited the U.S.-Mexico border, which is where the problem is actually located, which she did not see as part of her mandate. Now, in case you may have missed it, or to refresh your memories, I want to show you that interview, and I want you to pay attention to how she reacts when he catches her off guard and asks her a question she wasn't expecting. Watch this.
Let me just quickly put a button.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
You haven't been to the border, and you saw her freeze. Well, I've been to Europe either. And she has that, that odd laugh, about, I don't understand. Well, why don't you understand? It's pretty self-evident. If you're sitting there talking about ways to fix the immigration process and you don't even go to the border, how are you going to know firsthand what's going on right there while you are going to these other overseas places? That's necessary. If you're trying to identify the core issues, it's valid that she should go there. That was good, actually. But when you haven't even been to the border and you don't understand the optics of what people say that the problem in America is going on at the border, you don't even go. And then you don't seem to even understand why that's a problem to some people. And then when caught off guard, she wasn't clear on what to do then. That was one issue. Now, that was what was talked about in the article. I'm going to show you a separate one from Andrea Mitchell when she was asking her some national security issues that, again, were very hard. Now, she's going to start off, Andrea Mitchell, asking a very valid, very important question that needs an answer. Watch what she doesn't get in return.
This is becoming a war of attrition. Doesn't Vladimir Putin have more ammunition, more artillery to outlast Ukraine?
Well, you're right, Andrea, that Vladimir Putin decided, unprovoked, to start this war. And he has the ability to end it by stopping and getting out.
He's shown no sign of giving up or negotiating.
Well, that is a part of why we will make sure that we do everything possible within our power to strengthen Ukraine's position on the battlefield, so that if and when there are negotiations, Ukraine will be in the strongest position in a negotiation.
Will the American people be willing, especially with a Republican majority now in the House, will they be willing to stand up for Ukraine and make sacrifices?
I know the American people. I know who we are. And I've seen how the American people feel about this. I've seen it traveling all over our country, to places you might not imagine, where Ukrainian flags are flying in their windows. I know the American people feel a sense of moral outrage and a sense of responsibility for our nation to stand with the Ukrainian people around these atrocities. And I'm confident in that. I'm confident in that.
Okay, Andrea Mitchell asked two really important and profound questions in that interview right there. This is just last year again. She says, in the context, this is when there was a counteroffensive that was either going on or had just started, and it was not going well for the Ukraine side, which if you've been watching our channel for any time, you know we've detailed and categorized exactly why it didn't work out. But she asked her, she said, Putin has more men, he has more ammunition, he has more weapons, they got more capabilities, and she could have continued on with industrial capacity and all these kinds of things that Ukraine doesn't have. If you're getting into a war of attrition, how can Ukraine win that war? Now, that deserves an answer from the Vice President of the United States. And instead, she didn't answer the question. She started talking about other things that are not even related to the question she answered. She never even circled back to it. And that is so important. And right now, that's what President Biden should be answering that question right now. If you see the fundamentals that go into what wins and what loses wars, especially when you get into wars of attrition, which this is certainly in that category. It's been going on for 2.5 years now. The side that has more men, the side that has more industrial capacity, the side that can produce the most ammunition, and that has the most capacity to increase all of those, is going to ultimately win over the side that has smaller capacity. And even when you look at all the things that the West can provide and all the things that Russia's allies can provide, what the Russian side had is significantly more than what the Ukraine side. Even if this thing drug on for another year, maybe even 2 years, it's just mathematically not going to be possible for the Ukraine side to stand up when they don't have enough of any of the things you need to win a war. Now, why then, if that be the case, would you want to continue to support it? Because by continuing to support it, by not putting any diplomatic effort behind it, what you're going to eventually get is that the side that you're supporting, the side that you claim is the good guys, will be destroyed. That's what Andrea Mitchell was getting to. That's what President Biden has not answered to date. And that's what now Kamala Harris, who wants to be the next president in January of 2025, also is not answering. And yet, as we're going to see here in a minute, last night, she just pretended like none of that was going on. And here's what she's going to do. I don't want to be a spoiler there, so let's wait till we get to that one. But you see, the big problem here is that she's not answering the question. The second thing she was asking in that interview was, what about the American people? Are the American people going to be willing to continue to put this kind of money, especially when they don't see, success on the battlefield, and when they see the Ukraine side losing? Are they going to be willing to make sacrifices for this? And instead, you can see her again, that she literally was going slow with her, and then didn't answer the question, and then kind of came back and said, "Well, I know the American people, and they had Ukraine flags and stuff." And that, well, okay, listen, let's get one thing straight here. Putting a little flag up on your social media is not a sacrifice. That's especially because it's kind of a popular thing to do, and especially early in the war, there's a bunch of those. They were all over the place. That's different than sacrificing. And by the way, there was some polls out, I think just less than a week ago, maybe it's even earlier this week, shows that the American people are not willing to sacrifice, and they do want to see a negotiated settlement. They do want to see this war come to an end, and they don't want to see America have to sacrifice and pay a price potentially getting into a war with Russia. They don't. So you don't have the American people with you, and you don't have the logic behind why we're continuing to fight. And instead of addressing that, she addressed none of it. That is one of the bigger problems that we have here. And again, this is someone who wants to be commander in chief, and she's not tackling the hard problems. Now, that was last year. Now then, let's circle back to the Washington Post section here, because there's one other big red flag I want to raise up there. She says that many in the White House saw that Lester Holt interview as a flashing red light. What it exposes almost immediately was her greatest vulnerability, which is that she had no infrastructure. Eddie had said, there's nobody I can call to help defend her, to help change the narrative. I've got to do something to change what is on the television. Who am I going to call? No, Miss Etienne. It's not about TV. It's not about changing the narrative. It's about having a policy that can work. I mean, you saw in that debate from 2019 with President Biden, later President Biden. She's talking about all these things she wants to do with various domestic policies, and he said that you can't afford that. It will take 2 years after, even if you won 2 consecutive terms, we would still not be able to pay for this. So there's things that you can see that the ideas she has that they're just unrealistic and unreasonable. And you can't just change that by going and talking to somebody on TV, though you can change the narrative. That much is true. And that much is happening, because the reason why she's not, going on television now, interviews, the reason why she's not giving press conferences is because it's unscripted, and you can't control that narrative, because once that's out there, it's out there. But you see, their idea is to control the narrative, control the subjects that she talks about, and control any ability for anyone to ask hard questions. Now, folks, again, in a campaign, if it's about made for TV deals like this campaign is right now, that can succeed. And in terms of that it's going pretty good. She's ahead in the polls. So that's working. But we're, again, not talking about just a popularity contest. It's not like she's going to wear a crown and, go around with a little scepter for a while and make public appearances. She's going to be the one, if she wins, who has the power of the nuclear codes. Whether we go to nuclear war or not, she has the decision of whether we go to war or not, or whether she sends on missions that men will die, women will die in America because at the orders of this person here. It is profoundly important that we find out exactly what she wants to do, what she plans to do in these certain circumstances, so that when it becomes real, and it always does, every president will eventually get tested. What is the likely outcome that we'll do, so that beforehand? Because if you don't know until it actually happens, it's too late. You don't get a chance to redo. It'll be 4 years before we can hire someone else. That is why this is so important to get ascertained and nailed down right now. And actually, the New York Times, this is on Monday, they actually quantified that the press has questions for Vice President Kamala Harris. She isn't giving a lot of answers. In the nearly 3 weeks since President Biden withdrew from his candidacy, catapulting Ms. Harris to the top of the Democratic ticket, the vice president has shown little eagerness to meet with journalists in unscripted settings. She has not granted an interview or held a news conference. Now, I don't know how much longer she's going to be able to get away with that. But one of the things I'm going to do for you here today is I'm at least going to ask the hard questions. Now, last night she gave this big speech, of course, and as I mentioned at the top here, it was met with rousing applause and huge congratulations by so many on the friendly Democratic media like MSNBC. But we're going to get to a few questions here that maybe they want to give a little bit more thought to. So I'm going to limit this to the national security area, since that's what we talk about mainly on this channel. I'm sure others can do it on domestic issues, economic, etc. But because the commander-in-chief is the aspect of that job which is the most important and consequential to the physical lives of our nation, we're going to look at some of those. First of all, here's one of the things she said she would do as commander-in-chief.
As commander-in-chief, I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. And I will fulfill our sacred obligation to care for our troops and their families, and I will always honor and never disparage their service and their sacrifice.
Okay, your number one sacred honor is not to have a powerful military that you can use. Your number one sacred obligation is to keep America safe and not use that military unless absolutely forced on us by circumstances beyond our control, that if we don't act, our people will be harmed or killed. That's what your obligation is. It has become a common normal thing now that whoever gets in the White House almost wants to use military force to show how strong they are, or that they think that that's the best way to compel other people around the world to do what they want to do. So now then it's kind of like this, our main thing is to have a strong military to use. No, it's to have a strong military, and I am a strong advocate of having a powerful national security. I want us to have a military, armed forces, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, that can keep us safe, but that doesn't have to be used. The idea is that you have a strong, well-funded, well-trained force that can handle our national security, that can defend our borders, but that doesn't have to be used unless it's absolutely the last resort necessary to keep us alive. That means it's not designed to use as just a normal policy stick to beat people about the head and shoulders when they don't do what we want to do. Because as we're now starting to see, that has been a disastrous failure for decades, because that is how it's been used so far. But that has increased the people who are opposed to us. It has given Russia and China especially, but not only them, others, all kinds of incentives and motives to oppose us, to have stronger militaries of their own, and perhaps even work against our interest elsewhere. It's eroded our ability to influence independent thinkers and independent nations around the world, and giving them motivation to go elsewhere, to side with other people, to not be under our wing, to not be under our fist or under our boot. And there's a big meeting coming up in the among the BRICS in October of this year, which could be very catastrophic or consequential anyway to our interest, because so far the Western economies anchored by the G7 has kind of led the way. And has been really the standard for the better part of a century, certainly going back to the post-World War II period. It has been the engine for global economic support and advancement. But now then, because of some of our leadership and the things that we've been doing for a number of decades now, people are getting tired of that. So you have people looking over to the BRICS, which started off being kind of a fringe thing when it first started. But now then, there's the potential for scores of countries to join that. And this could dwarf the G7 in terms of economic power and potential, which could significantly change the dynamic and the balance of power in the world and substantially lessen our ability to influence things around the world. That is something off the battlefield, but as a consequence of thinking that everything has to have a military solution. It's a much bigger deal than it may appear. The second thing is that, and kind of related to this, she says she wants to be showing the world's leadership. And watch this clip.
I will make sure that we lead the world into the future on space and artificial intelligence, that America, not China, wins the competition for the 21st century, and that we strengthen, not abdicate, our global leadership.
Now, that kind of harkens back to what President Biden said in his speech at the Democratic Convention on Monday, where he said, we rule the world, or I think he said, we lead the world. And the world is better because of it, and we're winning, and all this kind of stuff. Clearly, she is right in line with that. Only that's not how it's happening, is it? That's not the case right here. We do desperately need American leadership. But let me define what leadership actually means. It doesn't mean having this great military, like she said in the previous clip, so that I can beat anybody on the head and shoulders and compel them to do what they want if they don't want to. because we want a win. And I don't care about win or lose or win-win. They somehow don't care about that. We just want to win, and you can do whatever. You can have the garbage that's left over, I suppose. That's kind of the mentality that we have, and it's wearing thin. Okay, this is no longer 1991. 1991, China still had a peasant army, basically. They were way behind technology. Their economy was moribund. It wasn't very modern or technology. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, and it's going to be a smoldering heap for another decade, even after that. And there was nobody else out there, and the West was only too happy to let us have the leadership and everything. And so we literally could do whatever we wanted to, and we did. No one could do anything about it at the time. That's not the case anymore, which means our leadership has to change now. You can't just compel people and tell them what you want to do. You have to actually work with people. And even though she says she wants, to lead an AI and all these other things, which that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's how you do it that matters. If you want to try to do it because you're going to outcompete them and produce superior results to offer other people around the world superior products, superior services, better deals to make them desire to come with us, that's good and useful, and that has long-term sustainability processes. But when you want to try to subvert the other side and then compel others to follow our lead here, this is just not going to work, as the BRICS issue is about to explode, I think, in a little bit bigger way. You can't keep going down a path that just says we're going to rely on the military strength. The world has changed, and you do have these other now rising poles in Russia and in China. And even in the global south to a certain extent. You have India as well. It's also asserting its size and strength, especially in the economic areas here, which means we have to do hard work now. We can't just compel people, and we're not going to always get our way. And if you have this mentality that says, I'm going to work with people, I'm going to actually seek a win-win situation, and I'm also going to understand that I'm not going to get everything I want, but I can get most of what I want, and then what I do get can be great. If you had that mentality, the security of America, our economic prosperity would be assured for decades to come, indefinitely, actually, as long as you have that attitude. But we don't seem to have it right now. We seem to be locked into this just perpetual cycle that we don't want to do that. We don't want to do hard work. We just want a big military that everybody's afraid of, that they'll do what we want anyway. See, here's the problem with that. It's not working. It hasn't worked. The BRICS thing is evidence of it. The fact that you're seeing, this incredibly unstable Middle East. You have the war continuing to rage in Russia and Ukraine that could potentially draw in other European states. Instead of bringing that to a close, we let it fester and we feed it. And we have issues in the Indo-Pacific. I could go on there for a long time as well. We're not taking actions that lower tensions. We're doing actions that keep them stoked, and then we keep feeding that too. Because we want only us to win, and we want anyone we don't like to lose. And we want our friends and allies as long as we win and as long as it works out good for us. And it's not working. That's not what's happening. You have the global south moving away. You have Brazil moving away from the United States and the West in general. You even have part of NATO starting to fracture. We keep talking about, the administration keeps talking about how NATO is as unified as it's ever been. That's nonsense. You have Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Turkey, all actually trying to drift away from where Biden's leading towards having a negotiated settlement in the Russia. So those are some pretty major states, and a lot of others are kind of on the fence. You have Germany starting to say, hey, we're running out of cash, so we're going to give you, I think it's 6% next year, what they had been given here. And that's not going to be the last of that trend that's following, I assure you. So what we've been doing, what she's saying she wants to do, is not good for America, and it's not going to help us out. And so let's look at what she does say on Ukraine, as a matter of fact, because that's kind of important too.
5 days before Russia attacked Ukraine, I met with President Zelensky to warn him about Russia's plan to invade. I helped mobilize a global response, over 50 countries, to defend against Putin's aggression. President, I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies.
Okay, great flourishing speech. It really sounds impressive. But here's my real concern on that, is that she has no idea about military matters as they relate to war. Now, I know she knows what a jet is. She knows what a plane is and all that kind of stuff. She knows that the military is strong, but it's self-evident that she doesn't have an understanding of how wars work. Because if you did, going back to the Andrea Mitchell thing, she gave her a clue there. The fundamentals that go into winning wars are in Russia's favor, not in Ukraine's favor. So why would you want to continue to stand behind something that's failing? I mean, literally right now, watch our show from yesterday on this. Because of this operation into the Kursk area that Ukraine has, they have diverted some of their last and best troops that they had that were actually well trained into a militarily unattainable mission up there. And now then they're not available for use to where the line is starting to buckle in the east, in the Pokrovsk area, et cetera. And so now then they're at increasing and actually accelerated risk of possibly even having a collapse somewhere in their defense. And it's not going to matter how much weapons and everything, even if it's a manpower issue. Ukraine doesn't have enough men, even if they had all kinds of weapons. And obviously they have some because they're getting blown up left and right on their offensive there. Russia has no shortage of these things. And they're not going to, because they have the raw materials, they have the industrial capacity, they have stuff from allies, certainly from North Korea, from Iran, and indirectly, and in many other categories from China, but they have their own domestic capabilities. Those things are going on. So why do you want to make this big, boisterous claim that you're going to continue to stand with Ukraine if that's going to fail? That's not good for America. It's not good for Ukraine, because think about the ramifications of this. If where these trends are going continue, and it's even possible that this could have a collapse even before the next president takes office, whoever that turns out to be. What is going to happen to the United States credibility with this that you took credit for about having this 50-nation assembly of people get behind Ukraine fails? That the best that we could provide out there, all the ammunition, the training, the intelligence, the weapons, failed to stop Russia, and they ended up winning the war, and Ukraine lost. Do you understand the geopolitical ramifications of that? Because we'll have been seen as absurd and a failure at the thing that we're supposed to have as our strength. This could have terrible ramifications and make our security even less strong. It would definitely diminish even further our ability to influence events around the world. People are not going to want to listen to us because they think, look, these things were self-evident for a long time. People were warning, not just my channel. Many other people who were knowledgeable around the United States and in Europe have been, beating the drum on this. This stuff is going in the wrong directions. But listen, folks, if it collapses and if Russia ends up winning, and certainly they have the wherewithal to do that, just imagine how people are going to be looking at you if she wins and says, where's all this talk that you made before? And here's the thing. I doubt she knows it. I don't think that she's aware of it. I think she's probably been told that we can keep going down this path. I mean, that's what the administration's been doing. Why would she, I guess, change in midstream? But if anything else, you're running for president right now. You've got to be able to say something that's going to have a chance to succeed. But that's what I want to see from the person who wants to be the next commander-in-chief, is that they know what they're talking about, that they have the intellectual capacity to understand what works and what doesn't, and they have the hard nose and the difficult or the strong leadership capacity to compel people to do what we want, especially within our own sphere, and to make the hard choices. Even if it's something we don't like, it's distasteful, but it's necessary. I want to see someone have that kind of courage and strength of character to get done. I don't want to see someone who's just basking in the glory and who has rhetorical flourish on easy topics. That's not going to make a good commander-in-chief. All right, that's for the Ukraine side. Now let's switch to the Middle East, where we have a different problem.
And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7. At the same time, What has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Okay, man, that was one of the biggest applause of the entire night. And it just is embarrassing to me because, again, it doesn't appear that the vice president really understands what's going on or what's at stake here. Because there's two big problems with what she said there. Let's look at the one at a time. The first one, it's almost as though she's going to continue on with the same path that the current president has been doing, which is basically to subordinate American national security and the United States Armed Forces to use by Israel. We claim that we want to work on a negotiated settlement. We claim that we're seeking a ceasefire. We claim that we care about the Palestinian people, but we take no action to bring any of those things about. We have a lot of leverage, and there's a lot of things we could do to make that come about. We have adamantly refused to do all of them. There have been so many times when the president, and certainly Vice President Harris throughout the last, since October 7th especially, has said our objective is a ceasefire and a two-state solution, by the way. And she mentioned that or referred to that toward the end of her speech there. But Netanyahu has said, no, there will be no two-state solution. In fact, I'm going to dominate from the river to the sea, from the Jordan River all the way through. We're going to dominate everything. That means the West Bank. That means the Gaza Strip and everything in between. That's allegedly directly contradictory to our outlined policy objectives, which we want for the Middle East. We say we want a negotiated settlement. Israel assassinates the chief negotiator for the other side. We do nothing. Israel attacks an embassy compound, which violates every aspect of the international rules-based order that we claim to want to support. We do nothing. As a matter of fact, it's worse than we do nothing. This is from earlier this year. When Israel did that and then the expected response came from Iran, we actually used the U.S. Armed Forces to shoot down a substantial majority of the drones and other missiles that were coming in from that country against Israel, basically handing them the United States Air Force to use as their own. Even though Israel had prompted that by their act of war, and destroying someone's embassy is an act of war, and we did nothing to stop it. And so we just say, whatever you want, Mr. Netanyahu, is what we're going to do. I'm not worried. I'm not talking about the words that come out of their mouth. I'm talking about the actions. But you see, the words that do come out are, again, words that the voters and the Democrat side want to hear. They want to hear that we are supporting Israel because that's how it's supposed to work. But again, if you understood the realities behind, you would know that's not going to help Israel. It is not doing Israel, the people, any favors by doing whatever Netanyahu says. Because if we keep going down that path, not only will there be no ceasefire, there probably will be a war with Iran and possibly Hezbollah and maybe even several others in the region too, in terms of some of these so-called axis of resistance that are in the area there. If we keep letting Netanyahu call the shots, that's probably the most likely outcome that's going to happen. Hopefully we'll get lucky and that won't happen and we'll be able to avoid that. I know that Secretary Blinken is actually trying to avoid that right now because the United States doesn't want a war with Iran for sure. Iran definitely doesn't want a war with us, but evidence appears that Netanyahu does want it. And he is trying to drag us into the war. And again, I don't care what anybody's words say. I only care what actions. And every action, you don't attack another country's embassy unless you want to go to war with them. You don't assassinate somebody in their capital city that you're supposed to be negotiating with unless you want a war. And there have been scores of Israeli assassinations. And we're talking about in Beirut, in Lebanon, elsewhere in Iran, all over the place. whether they intend them or not, they probably do. Those are the kinds of things that spark wars. And, don't have to go any further than World War I to understand how one political assassination can result in all kinds of carnage. Well, it looks like Israel's doing everything they can. And instead of standing up to Israel and saying, hey, stop doing this nonsense stuff, it doesn't make any sense, I'm not going to go to war. We should tell them that we're going to continue to help them as we have for decades. And we're going to help them defend themselves, but we're not going to fight a war for them. That's the reason why we give so much money, have for a long, long time, to Israel, so that they can defend themselves. They fought wars in 1967, 1973. We didn't fight for them then. Why does someone think that we need to fight for them now? And yet you have the Secretary of State recently saying that's exactly what we would do. If there's a war, we're going to continue to support them just like we did last time, I think was the phrase that he used. And that shouldn't be American policy, because that could get us drawn into a war. So instead of the presumptive next president of the United States trying to keep us out of war, she's basically given a green light to the guy who wants to get us drawn into a war. And that is not in America's interest at all. The second part of what she said there, which also bears some comment, is about the Palestinian people. Now, that was a sop to the part of the Democratic base that is really, really upset about the huge Palestinian civilian casualty toll since October 7th and Israel's response to the terrorist attack on October 7th. And instead of doing anything about it, we don't use any of our leverage for that either. So we claim that we want to stop that, but we do nothing to actually put pressure and use leverage against the Israeli government to ensure that the people get enough food and provisions, as well as stop doing some of the things that physically kill them, because we could do both of those things, but we're unwilling to. And so you have here a person who seeks to be the next commander-in-chief of the armed forces, submitting to whatever the political leadership in Israel wants to do, and taking no actions to stop this extraordinary loss of civilian life that perpetuates and still goes on every single day. And so she makes those claims but does nothing about it. And yet you saw the result. It was a rhetorical flourish and got enormous support from and applause from the people in the audience. They're not going to like it if she ends up being president and continues that path, though. It will not work out good for the Palestinian people. It will not work out good for the people of Israel, and it will not work out good for the American people and our armed forces. I pray to God that we don't ever have to prove all of those things. Last thing we want to talk about here, which in some ways is my biggest concern at all. This may be the biggest red flag that I have from all of this, and there have been some big ones that we've talked about already. But this last one is almost like an article of faith that she seems to really believe in here. And this sets up for all kinds of potential misuse and going sideways. Watch this.
And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand, and I know where the United States belongs.
This struggle between tyranny and democracy. So she is setting us up there, and she is setting up a potential Harris presidency, that she's going to use this strong armed force she talked about earlier in the speech to defend democracy against tyranny, like it's a holy war of sorts, that she's going to want to do that. And she wants to use the military force, and she's willing to use military force for that. And I mean, you can, this really breaks down all kinds of places, but do you really want to say that Israel right now is a democracy when they are oppressing an entire population, 5 million people in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, and depriving them of any kind of rights? Does that really sound like a democracy? We're not talking about Hamas. We're not talking about the terrorists that did the October 7th. I'm talking about the 5 million people that are Palestinians in that area. They are being, as a group, suppressed like you cannot imagine if you actually look. Does that sound like a democracy? Look at Ukraine. You have the political parties were suppressed and shut down. The media was shut down. That wasn't approved by Kiev. Religious institutions have been shut down. People have been press ganged into service against their own constitution. The election was canceled. America went through elections in the Civil War. America went through elections in World War II. But somehow Russia went through elections recently during the war. But somehow we say, no, Ukraine can't. So we let him bypass on that. That's a lot of stuff. Does that look like a democracy? So we're claiming to stand from democracy and tyranny, and we're on democracy side, but the two biggest people we're supporting in war right now show a lot of evidence that they're not really democracies. So then what does that tell you? What are we standing for? What do we believe? What is the dividing line? Because a lot of people use this that with Russia, a tyranny, with China, a tyranny. We like to talk about it, Iran, North Korea, etc. Is she setting us up potentially to do battle with those four people? Any of one of the four, all the four? I don't know. But when you get this in these almost religious tones that we're standing for this side and we're against this side here, then you really eliminate the possibility of just, you know what, let's try to get along with people, even those we don't like, even those we don't agree with, even those who have governments that we don't like and think should be better. But let's try to keep things on a stable platform. Let's try to use our positive influence as much as we can to move things in a direction we want to, but recognize there are limits to power and that we can't compel things no matter how much we may want to, no matter how much some may believe should. You have limits of power and you can only do so much. When you use lethal power, is the situation in Ukraine solved? Is the Ukraine people any better? Hundreds of thousands of them are dead. Many scores of their cities are literally turned to dust. The war is not over. They may end up losing it because of our support. You have Israel in the Middle East, who has gotten our unbridled support. Whatever they've asked for, we've given them. They're 10 months into a war against basically an insurgency that they're no closer to winning now than they were before, at the extraordinary cost. And there's no evidence that they're going to succeed, and they may draw us into a larger war. Does that sound like something that's positive? Does that sound like something you want to emulate? Folks, I think you know the answer to it. It's not. When you're willing to look past the rhetorical flourishes, when you look into the substance of what's actually happening on the ground and what we have accomplished or failed to accomplish using these very strategies and tactics over many, many years, it's time to do something different. It's not time to give this raucous applause when someone says we're going to keep doing the same things that haven't worked. We might even do them harder. That's not what we need right now. We need somebody who understands the situation, who recognizes themselves what is and isn't possible, and wants to produce genuine leadership. That means taking hard decisions and doing things that are unpopular sometimes, but that are necessary, because it's and seeking after things that are positive, that can lower the temperature, that can reduce the chance for war, that can increase our national security and give us a chance to perpetuate economic viability into the future. All of those things are still possible, but all of them are at risk if we keep going down the same path that we've been doing, oblivious to reality and just focusing on things that are easy to talk about and taking the hard stuff off the table. It's not going to work out good for us, folks. That's the bottom line. That's what you need to understand. And that's what we have for you today. Like I said, we're going to look at the other candidates that are still in this race. President Trump, possibly Jill Stein. I don't know if RFK is going to stay in the race or not. He may not, but if he does, we'll talk on that later as well as we get closer to the election. But we're always going to be focused on the truth. We're always going to tell you what's really going on. And we're always going to tell you what's happening on the ground, so that when you make decisions anyway, especially when you go to the voting booth, you do so with a cold, sober, truthful understanding of what's happening. Thank you for joining us today. Come back in about an hour at 3 o'clock Eastern time today. I'm going to do we're back to our deep dive intel briefing where we show you the best of some of the things we talked about during the week and some new issues, especially one that Putin has promised since our last episode, severe punishment for all those responsible for the Kursk offensive and what the Ukraine side is doing. We'll get more into that in about an hour. See you then. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you at 3 o'clock on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.